Hello Legion, it's Hadrian. Thank you for being here. Today is February the 14th, 2019, and Civilization VI Gathering Storm has been released. This second expansion pack brings an even greater amount of new and revised mechanics than the first expansion, Rise and Fall, did last year. And while these changes have been discussed at length in weekly developer streams and by players on social media, we've heard less detail about the update to the core game. I'm talking about the patch we all got this morning, whether or not we had Gathering Storm pre-ordered. Just before the game launched yesterday, Firaxis did publish the patch notes for the Gathering Storm update. I have every last patch note for you right here, and if you'd like, the link to the official post is in the description below. This is the complete list of changes coming in the Gathering Storm launch patch, and this video, like the patch notes, is going to completely ignore the new features that are exclusive to the expansion, and we're going to focus instead on the free update and these patch notes. So if you own at least the base game of Civilization VI or just Rise and Fall, whichever it might be, everything we're about to go over applies to you and might even have already downloaded. It's an extensive list and definitely represents an impressive amount of work on the part of the development team at Firaxis. There's a section, of course, for the AI, the interface, graphics, multiplayer, balance, performance, bug fixes, artwork, and more. Without messing with the order of it, or the formatting of it, or anything, I am going to take my time and read you the patch notes, line by line, beginning to end. I haven't even read the list in its entirety myself, so while I might find some surprises as I go, I'm going to stay out of the way as best I can. I'll provide explanations and helpful context if I feel like I can do so, but for the most part, I just want to go over the notes exactly as they are without too much chit-chat. So as you might imagine, the very first section is the one devoted to the AI and the changes that have been made to the artificial intelligence in Civilization VI. One thing I'll note about this list as I begin is that a lot of the language of the list is written in an instructional manner, so it's almost as if the developer is giving instructions to the AI as they read down this list of changes, as opposed to explaining the change to us. Not all of them are written that way. It's kind of inconsistent. I'm going to read it as is and explain as necessary without going off on too much of a tangent. AI now builds and uses aircraft more effectively, so air combat definitely has left something to be desired to this point in Civilization VI, definitely less fleshed out as an endgame combat mechanic than, say, Civilization V, so the AI is now going to focus more on building and actually using the aircraft than they have before. I would imagine that is a very abbreviated note for a more comprehensive set of changes and improvements to the AI's aircraft building, and that will, of course, force players to use aircraft more effectively as well. Weaken AI garrisoning if they can use it to take an enemy city. So that one is kind of instructional. Basically what that's saying is that, I believe what it's saying anyway, is that the AI will weaken or maybe even abandon a garrison if those units in the garrison can be used to take a nearby city. So some prioritization going on there. And lots of these notes are priority based. Don't send more than one unit to capture a given unescorted civilian. In non-emergency situations, the AI will not trade away more gold per turn than they make excluding trade deals. Again, AI will not trade away more gold per turn than they make, excluding trade deals. Improve AI's ability to garrison ranged units during city attacks. So in other words, the AI is going to do a better job at defending its own cities than it has in the past. When the AI takes a city, it will automatically assign a defender as well. If an AI can take a city this turn, don't try to defend your units first in the process. So what that's saying is that if the AI is close to taking one of your cities, they will go all in, even if a unit is on the verge of dying. That does mean that there are weaknesses that might potentially be exploited by your defending army if the AI is attacking you, but the AI will push harder and fight harder to take a city if it feels like it has a chance, which is an important change, I think, to the aggressiveness of the AI. Increased value of picking up resources for unit maintenance. So that relates somewhat to the changes that have been made in Gathering Storm. Of course, these strategic resources are now resources that accrue over time, and later in the game, they're actually required for maintenance, for instance, fuel of your armies. So increasing the value, increasing the prioritization of picking up those resources so you can field an army as necessary, especially in the late game, is now more important to the AI. Digging up artifacts in an ally's territory counts as an incursion. Not really an AI change per se, but an interesting one nonetheless, because previously, if you had declared a friendship and, made an ally of someone nearby, and then you went through their territory digging up their artifacts, they might not have minded as much as they do now. So that's an interesting change. Barbarian raid timer now starts as soon as the first unit arrives in range, instead of waiting for the final unit. I've read this note a couple of times, and I genuinely don't quite know how to read it, so we can talk about a few of these when this happens in the comments below. Let me read this again. Barbarian raid timer now starts as soon as the first unit arrives in range instead of waiting for the final unit. Here's my question. The first unit of what? The first unit of the player scouting out the Barbarian raid, the first unit of the Barbarian raid to spawn. What the Barbarian raid is when the scout returns. The Barbarian scout has found your city and gets all the way back to their encampment to let the Barbarians know that there's a city to raid, and so a raid timer starts. And so now it's saying that the timer starts as soon as the first unit arrives in range. Not clear what the first unit means, but previously apparently it waited for the final unit. Not clear what the final unit means. Again, we'll talk about that in the comments, so there might already be some clarity on that by the time you're listening to this if you just scroll down and see what people have said. Allow barbarians to go through unexplored territory as part of an attack. That is a significant change to the barbarians' aggression. It does mean they'll be more reckless, so basically they won't try and path through where the scout went on the map to find your city. If they know where your city is and they can draw a line straight to your city, they will just go straight for it, as opposed to following the path that they scouted, which is very, very interesting. It does mean they'll be slightly more reckless in the same way that the AI might be a little bit more aggressive when they're close to taking a city. So same kind of thinking, slightly more aggressive moves from the barbarians. AI will protect units assigned to defend a city from attack while they are trying to get to the city. That's an interesting double-layered kind of strategy. So not only is the AI focusing more on assigning units that are going to garrison and defend a city, but when they've picked those units out, they will make sure those units live if the units have a few turns before they're going to get to that city they're defending. Increase weighting, that's weighting in terms of prioritizing, for Naval Superiority AI trees to focus on building sea units. So the AI is going to focus more on going for naval superiority so that they will build more ships and have more of a navy fielded out in the oceans. So the AI tries to figure out if a city is on the periphery before taking it and avoids jumping into the center of an empire unless it needs to. So the AI will now kind of make a judgment on whether or not the city it's trying to conquer is very central and is going to have some loyalty issues, or is going to be easy to take, which is a nice change. That does mean they'll be slightly less reckless and more calculated. Whether that means the AI will appear less aggressive in certain situations, we'll have to see how that pans out. Allow AI to levy for defensive purposes. So the AI can now levy city-state units. Apparently this wasn't allowed to the AI before. This is very interesting. It's always been available to players, but now the AI, if they're trying to defend themselves and they need more units, they can levy units from a nearby city-state if they have the gold to pay for it, and that will be an option available to them. AI now simplifies and focuses trade deals when requesting trades rather than asking or offering a smorgasbord of items. I love the way that that is phrased. But again, AI is now going to offer simpler trade deals when requesting trades. Of course, there's more going on with trades now that diplomatic favor is a thing in Gathering Storm. But if you don't own Gathering Storm yet, in general, across the board, regardless of how many expansions you've bought for Civilization 6, the AI is going to have simpler trade deals overall, which is nice. Correct an issue that was preventing the AI from properly theming artifact collections. Nice. Don't warn or get angry if partner converts target city of religious emergency. Let me read that again. Don't warn or get angry if partner converts target city of a religious emergency. So if you have a partner in an emergency, and because they are your partner in that emergency, you have a shared objective, the AI will no longer get mad at its partner, you for instance, if you're the player, for just doing the thing you're supposed to do in the religious emergency, basically. All right, so that's the section on AI changes, and there may be some additional AI changes in the weeks to come as they do some post-release patching, as is fairly common with major expansions like this. This is a big expansion, regardless of whether you've bought Gathering Storm yet. We just finished the first section of a long list of patch notes. So, moving on to the UI, the user interface, and the changes there. So new features are, first of all, in the front end, there's a Hall of Fame now that you can get to from the main menu, victory and defeat tracking with detailed statistics and graphs for each. You're going to have to see that for yourself to believe it. It is a very impressive feature and just allows you, those of you who are very achievement oriented in terms of your play, it's an in-game achievement system to track how well you've done with each leader and at what difficulty levels throughout your experience in Civilization 6. And if you have old game saves, you can load all of them back up as a means. This is something that Ed Beach said recently. I don't know exactly how this works, but you can load all of them back up as a way to kind of fill out your Hall of Fame with gameplay that you've already completed, or you can start afresh. It's whatever you would like to do. An in-game new feature that's been added is the build queue and multi-queue. Both repeatedly requested items and long-awaited items in Civilization 6. So the build queue is finally there, and also the multi-queue, which is an amazing way to see what is building across your entire empire. A great in-game kind of maintenance tool for seeing what's going on at a glance, which is always kind of something we've passively wanted. You're playing Civilization 6 and you're thinking, man, you know, I could really use a tool like that. Even if you're not thinking it in the front of your mind, somewhere, you know, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, that would be nice if we had that. Well, now we do. It comes along with a tabbed interface to toggle between modes, which is quite nice. Also, one thing I'll note here, since I don't think I see it on the list, there is also a tabbed interface to just jump to a specific section in the build queue. So if you want to go straight down to city projects without having to use your scroll wheel or click the scroll bar, you can now do that by clicking a button at the top of the build queue, which is pretty nice. There is a new lens in the game, the Empire Lens, which is a very nice new feature. When toggled, displays owned territory as well as district locations and the base yields from districts. So this is finally a way to, at a glance, see where your districts are, which is a problem when you have a large empire. Like, where are my industrial zones? What cities is that boosting? Am I adding a city in the range of this industrial or entertainment zone? Whatever it might be. Now you can see very clearly where they are and what the yields for those districts are. So you can kind of see at a glance, that's a district that I really want to defend. That one doesn't matter to me as much, etc. The World Resources Report is a breakdown of how many strategic and luxury resources each major civ possesses that you've met. So it's an improved interface and report for your resources as well as the resources of the other civilizations on the map. So some changes to the minimap. There is a new minimap that is easier to read, and also there's a new full screen minimap mode. You might have seen this in my Phoenicia series already. You can toggle this at any point in the game. You might have seen it also in some of the dev live streams. There's a new button on the far right side of the minimap buttons that you can use just to pull the minimap up to the entire screen. It's not necessarily the prettiest thing in the world, but when you're trying to see fine detail for whatever reason, something that the minimap is showing you, you can do that. And of course, strategic view is still an option as well, which I think a lot of people would argue might be better than, than full screen minimap. Anyway, I digress. Map labels, in-world text labels on natural wonders and national parks. This is actually a major new feature, but this is, as the patch notes are noting, Gathering Storm rule set games only. So for whatever reason, this particular patch note, this is a Gathering Storm patch note. Map labels don't really apply if you are not using Gathering Storm because you don't have the Gathering Storm rule set. So this is just saying that natural wonders and national parks do have map labels in the same way that volcanoes and some of the new terrain features in Gathering Storm have. Well, not really new terrain features. Gathering Storm just allows labels to exist for deserts and for rivers and for oceans and continents and all these things in a way that is more detailed and more visually appealing than previously. So some of that carries through to the base game, but only if you have Gathering Storm. It's weird. So, game setup and options. There have been some changes here as well. Multiple colorblind accessibility options are now available. Touch input enable checkbox available. So you can, if you're playing Civilization 6 on the tablet, if you're playing like the PC version on a PC tablet, you can toggle touch input on and off. There's now a graphics option to toggle cloud shadows. I've definitely noticed in Gathering Storm there are darker areas of the map at different times, so that's worth paying attention to. Mouse wheel speed option is now available as well. Warning about mod compatibility checkbox available. Gathering Storm benchmark options. So this requires Gathering Storm as well. So if you want to see that the uppermost Gathering Storm settings, graphics-wise, which are very impressive, by the way, we'll talk about these in a moment, can run on your system, and you have Gathering Storm, there is a specific benchmark dedicated to these new options for those of you with maybe medium to low-end video cards. The Civilization Jersey system automatically adjusts the color scheme of your borders and your civilization if they're too close in color range to another. So an example of this is if you are playing as Dido, and Dido has a kind of blue and purple color scheme. If Rome is in your game, Rome will be a very Roman like red and gold, as opposed to the purple and gold, because the purple is a little bit too close to Dido's on the map. So, and the minimap color will also be red for Rome instead of purple. So that's an example of the Jersey system. Scalable resource and yield icons with high resolution textures available. This can be modified via XML. And this is really nice because, as you'll recall previously, when you would zoom out, if you had your resource icons turned on, the resource icons wouldn't really shrink. And so if you zoomed way out and we're trying to see fine detail on the map, there's these massive icons. You could turn them off, but if you wanted to have the icons on at the same time for whatever reason, they could kind of obstruct the view. So they now scale and get really big when you get close to them and get really small when you zoom out. Automatically hide the city ranged attack interface when selecting a unit. That's a nice visual upgrade. Automatically hide ranged attack arrow if a selected unit is out of moves. So you won't be able to trick yourself into thinking maybe I've got a ranged attack if you have no moves left. It's just a little bit more clarity. Things that the UI will not show you, which I'm a big fan of, if something is not possible. Automatically adjust the positioning of unit flags covering the city range strike button if an enemy unit moves in range. So a lot of the issues you might have had with units overlapping that little city range strike button maybe have been mitigated a little bit. I'm looking forward to seeing how that pans out. Added a recommended target tile highlighting for the archaeologist. So in other words, you have an archaeologist, it'll more straightforwardly point out where the various ancient ruins are that you can investigate. There has been some improvement in the unit cycling logic. So this reduces the instances of the camera getting pulled away from where the user intends to go. This is quite nice. Depending on what your game settings were, this might not have been a problem for you for a while, but it's still a welcome change. This next one I have literally stared at for a few minutes while recording this video. Pop-up and advisor queue ordering updates and progress. We're just going to talk about that in the comments section, because right now, as I'm reading down this list, that doesn't make any sense to me, but I'll bet we can make sense of it in the comments if we add a few words or move it around a little bit. So again, check the comment section below if any of this isn't making sense. There'll be plenty of discussion. Additional miscellaneous UI and text fixes, tweaks, and updates. So that's a very nice thing to see. Moving on to the graphics updates, and I have to say, as a side comment on this, they have been so low-key. I respect how low-key they've been. They've mentioned that they've done an art update, and they've kind of mentioned, yeah, we did this pass on the graphics engine. We've made some changes. They've been so humble about the work that they've done. The game is so much prettier. It's subtle. It's not necessarily like a completely different look. Certainly not. But they've made so many improvements, not only to the artwork, but to the graphics engine and the various things that the game does to just make itself very, very pretty. For example, there's a new particle system increasing performance and allowing many more particles to be visible at the same time. So you're much less likely to see effects flicker or fail to play correctly in complex scenes, which is wonderful because that would happen a lot once you got into the later game, especially if you were using mods, which might still be the case if you're using mods that increase the resources that Civilization is using. But that's a nice change to see leading the pack. Slowly moving cloud shadows, which was mentioned previously. These can be toggled via graphics options. New terrain and model reflections. Previously, only oceans and rivers had reflections. And by the way, the reflection of the sun on the water has also been updated. It's more detailed. It has a little bit more of a glint to it, a little bit more realistic and visually appealing. Again, just lots of tiny little changes, including to the reflections. Sub-pixel filtering for floating UI elements. So this will fix any kind of jitter that you might have noticed on your system for unit flags and city banners as the camera moves. Improved shadow quality on leaders. So there was an obsolete 8K shadow map option that was removed from the ultra settings of the game, and the shadow quality on leaders was generally improved. Further performance and memory usage improvements on DirectX 12, visual fidelity improvements and sharpness of culture borders and overlays at all graphics quality levels, various improvements to city and road layouts, various graphics performance optimizations, and multi-threading performance improvements. So lots of kind of aggregated items that don't go into detail. I would imagine these are at least medium-sized sets of changes, which is why they're just saying there have been improvements made. It's refreshing to see regardless, even though part of me kind of wants to be a nerd and know exactly what the improvements were. But those are the graphics updates. Multiplayer has received a very cool new feature. This is an homage to the hardcore classic Civilization players that grew up passing floppy disks back and forth. They talked about this on the live stream, so in a way I'm quoting Pete and Ed and Anton and some of the others that have talked about this, about playing by disk or playing by email in past versions of Civilization. There's now an option to play by cloud, which basically is a way to start a game that is running in the background of your life, and it will give you a notification through Steam, for instance, if you're running the game on Steam, that your turn is up, and you can log into the game whenever you're ready and do your turn and then send it back to your fellow players. And it's a way to play a game of Civilization 6 over the long term without necessarily having to sit down for a session on a weekend. So those of us who are very, very busy, if you actually want to play Civilization 6 with your friends, and you maybe have busy friends as well, that could be a really nice option for you. There have been multiple desync and stability fixes to multiplayer as well. Now let's look at some balance changes, going back to some gameplay-related stuff. So Barbarian camps now spawn recon ranged units in later starts. So if you start later than the Ancient Age, which I don't know how many of us take advantage of that option, I would prefer an option to have a cap age myself, to where the game could only progress to a certain point before you just sort of played through in a certain era, but that's just me. If you start the game, say, in the Industrial Age, or the Renaissance Age, or whatever, the Barbarian camps will spawn recon ranged units appropriately, and apparently they did not before. Unit and unit combat. Pillage rewards now scale by era. Huge change. So except for healing, everything now gives you a lot more of a reward. If you ever wondered why there were such crappy science and civics bonuses and gold bonuses for pillaging an atomic age civilization, no more. The yields have been substantially improved as they now scale by era. All healing rewards are now 50 HP exactly, so half HP immediately. Adjust pillaging rewards of science and culture improvements to be a base value of 15 instead of 25. So because pillage rewards have been scaled upward, the base amount has been reduced. Update the machine gun to have a range of 2. Oh my god, that's a surprise. I am just reading this for the first time as I record this video. That is fantastic. If you're not familiar, or if you can't think of why I'm so excited, the machine gun is on the Archer upgrade path. So what does it go? It goes Archer, Crossbowman, Field Cannon, Machine Gun. And all the way through that chain, until you get to Machine Gun, you have a range of 2 tiles. And then all of a sudden you get to Machine Gun and you only have a range of 1. And it almost makes you not want to upgrade the Field Cannons, right? Well, now evidently the Machine Guns have a range of 2, which is phenomenal. That is, oh, that's great. Okay. Add mobile ranged tags to spawn different units other than horse archers later in the game. So I don't know if this is referring to barbarians. It seems to be. We can talk about this one in the comments. I'm not quite as clear on what this one means. Add mobile range tags to spawn different units other than horse archers late in the game. Yeah, we'll talk about that one below. Air unit combat strength increased to more appropriately match corresponding land army formations. So I've stared at this one for a moment as well. What this is getting at is that air units will do a better job of attacking corps and armies as land units than they did before. They used to have a really hard time damaging corps and army units. Not anymore. Not as much an issue as it used to be. So that's a nice step in the right direction. This does say it's a Gathering Storm rule set change only. So again, there are some notes on here that are Gathering Storm exclusive, and I don't know why that would be Gathering Storm exclusive, so that's another thing we can chat about, because I'm a little bit in the dark as to why that would be just for the Gathering Storm rule set. Anti-air unit combat strength has been increased to match new air unit balance and lower maintenance. This is also for Gathering Storm rule set games only. Some of the air combat changes do apply across the entire game, but some of these things are Gathering Storm only. I would love to have more clarification on that. I don't at the moment. So stay tuned, I suppose. Players can now start with unique units even if they are not direct replacements. So you can have a unique unit starting out your game if your game's starting rule set allows for that, even if the unique unit is not a part of a given chain. If it's its own kind of chain that leads into future upgrades and it doesn't replace an existing unit, you can still start with that unique unit. I didn't know that that was forbidden before, so that's a nice kind of addition to give us more ability to take advantage of our unique units, depending on who we're playing as. Make the missile cruiser the same movement range as the battleship. That is also a very welcome change to see. Great to see that. So we're moving on to a smaller section for city combat now. Combat balance. Double wall hit points for all 3 tiers. So walls are going to be, oh wow. Now walls are going to be harder to get through. Outer defense strength modifier is increased for all 3 tiers to 3. It was 2. And I will tell you, in my initial gameplay, I noticed this. I didn't know that this is what it was, but I was attacking a city, I think, with medieval walls, and I was like, man, these medieval walls are putting up a fight. This is why. I'm not sure how I feel about this one. Walls are already, especially if the other civilization is technologically ahead of you, walls are already pretty formidable, especially with how difficult early game warfare can be if there are terrain constraints, if you don't have a sizable army that you can somehow field with your lower gold income earlier in the game. Not that you'll always have a low gold income early in the game, but just relatively speaking, it can be more challenging to fight, especially a quick early game war. So I would love to know more about what the logic for that one was. I'm sure there was a very good reason. I just don't know what it was. So that could be something we talk about down below as well. Update the Government Plaza to have the same base plunder value as other districts. Nice. So Government Plaza is a newer district, of course, added in last year's expansion. So the ability for the Government Plaza to be plundered at the same value as the existing districts is a nice kind of equalization. Audience Chamber Government Building is now a 3-housing government building as opposed to 4. Some changes to the tech and civics tree. The oil well improvement now unlocks with the steel technology. This is consistent with other resource reveals and the improvements that extract them. So just kind of bringing everything in line with some of the new changes. Policies and governments. Total war policy now gives 50% more gold from pillaging. Interesting. So that will, if you are using total war policy to wage total war, you'll get much richer in the process. Remove the double dipping of Huiteokali, Mausoleum at Halicarnassus, and Apadana wonders from policy cards. Update strategic Air Force policy to include all aircraft. Civil prestige policy now only requires a governor with 2 promotions and provides 2 housing. Nice. Policies that give increased production now continue to operate on old units. Oh, that's amazing. So all of the policies, military policies that provide boosts to units of a certain era will still provide boosts to older units as well if you want to produce those. That's a very nice change, I have to say. Policies now apply to all wonders prior to the policy era. So in the same way, Gothic architecture applies to ancient, classical, medieval, and Renaissance wonders. Before, it just applied to medieval and Renaissance. So we're seeing in general policies that are based on certain eras will kind of go back through everything that they could possibly apply to from previous eras, which is a nice change. It won't suddenly make building less sophisticated, older style structures more expensive, which makes a lot of sense. Civs. Tamar now has a faith preference, and sphinxes can now be built next to each other if you're playing as Egypt. So again, Tamar of Georgia now has a faith preference. Brief section on religion here. The Defender of the Faith combat bonus has been reduced to 5, down from 10. Interesting change. I used that tenet a good bit. Faith has been added to late start, so if you start later than the Ancient Age, you will have faith accruing already, which makes a lot of sense. Espionage. Counterspy and listening post missions are now renewable on the mission completed pop-up, which I have already seen in my test play, and that is an amazing change. It just allows you to keep a counterspy going without having to constantly reassign them and remember where you had them. Spread out all civilization and city-state starting positions where possible when generating the map. That is also really great. That's not really an espionage-related change. I don't know why it's there, but when generating the map, the game will now do a better job at kind of making people equidistant and spreading these civilizations out, clustering them less, which I like. Unless, of course, there are settings in, for instance, a mod. That might drive some of the modders, like for Yet Not Another Map Pack, a little bit crazy, because there are some mods that... Or maybe it won't be a problem, but there are some mods that allow you to only spawn in certain parts of the world and leave other parts of the world kind of unspoiled by civilization for you to discover later. So we have a brief section on performance here. Many performance updates to trade route calculations, pathing, and reports. Significant improvements to turn and AI processing times, especially late game. They talked about this a good bit in Sarah Darney's final stream, the pre-release stream that they did yesterday. This is, I think, especially with how much they've said about it and the fact that they've said significant improvements, I will be excited to see how this plays out, not only for me, but for you guys in terms of the late game improvements to turn processing times, because that could be a pain, waiting sometimes for the late game calculations to occur. Multiple UI performance improvements across different panels and screens in-game. Great to see that. And now for everybody's favorite section, bug fixes. Units and unit combat is the first subsection in bug fixes. The heavy cavalry promotion prerequisite connections are now fixed. Players are now allowed to deploy aircraft in allied territory. Air units can now attack a defensible district with a civilian unit garrisoned there. Multiple additional aircraft rebase and deploy bug fixes. That's great to see. So general improvements to the aircraft system we're seeing across the board. Paradrop should not consider a city center to be an airfield. Yes, thank you. When changing ownership of a unit from a levy, in most cases, the unit's experience and experience level was not being transferred. This is now working properly. Good to see. I remember that. The Garrison Promotion is now working properly as well. I remember seeing that in previous notes somewhere. They might have even talked about it in a stream. Evidently that might have been what it was. Evidently the Garrison Promotion wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. And the Garrison Promotion, if you're playing more defensively, that's one that you would use a lot. So I'm curious how much better it's going to be now that it quote-unquote works properly. Units joining a corps or army could receive build charges improperly. This is now working properly. Units are now forced to relocate if they are in an invalid location after a settlement is placed. Constructing a Roman fort improvement building now properly ends that unit's turn. Alliance combat modifiers are now displayed properly in the UI. Units with build charges are now able to be trained even in cities that have contaminated fallout. So that's pretty handy for actually cleaning up fallout. The defense strength modifier for terrain was incorrectly showing the cumulative amount in the preview text instead of the itemized amount. This has been corrected. So the defense strength modifier for terrain, I see. So if you're fighting and you are standing on hills, for instance, and you have a defense strength modifier, it was incorrectly showing the cumulative amount in the preview text instead of the itemized amount. It was showing your total defensive strength given the modifier, as opposed to just showing how much the modifier was helping you. Fix for an issue that could disallow an attack on an enemy city if it had a friendly unit inside. Fix for an issue where aircraft could get disconnected from the earlier carrier or from the carrier when it passed through another unit. Assume the weapon of mass destruction combat is always in the camera view. It can easily be skipped if it is partially off screen. So I imagine that is the bug. That's a weird way to put it, but I noticed sometimes that if you launch a nuke, you won't always see the mushroom cloud. And that can be disappointing sometimes, especially if you really, really hate the person that you're dropping that bomb on. That is something that you kind of want to see if you've had an enemy that has been giving you trouble for several turns. And so hopefully that is what that's saying. I might be misinterpreting, but I think that's what that's saying. Fix for an issue that was causing odd movement queue paths when they had long unit paths set. That's good to see, but I will say that unless they've patched the game that I was playing as a preview build, there can still be some weirdness based on if the settler, for instance, or builder that you're sending to a maybe more distant tile sees that there are other units maybe belonging to a city-state in the way, even if you can't see them, the AI, the processing, the back end of the game knows they're there, and the unit will sometimes change its path for no good reason. So I don't know if that's been fixed or not, but it's still good to see that pathing is generally being improved. Fix for multiple production overflow issues, and this is under cities and city combat now. Fix for urban defenses policy not properly granting 400 hit points to city defenses. Minor adjacency bonuses should not apply when placing districts next to a pillaged district. This has been corrected. Fix for city centers not getting additional production and food from modifiers. Fix for pillaged districts still providing amenities. Prohibit free cities, so free cities are now prevented from building palaces which were allocating duplicate or forged copies of great works to get into the game. That is fascinating. I had never encountered that, but that is an amazing bug, and it's almost sad to see it fixed, because that was probably somewhat funny when it happened. If a city is razed, all national parks are now properly removed. Good. The correct players' units will be properly expelled when a city is transferred by trade. Fixes for multiple issues with fallout-contaminated plots in cities, and fix for pillaged districts when transferring a city. Fix for district model visuals not updating properly from a pillaged state when repaired. Restore district combat if the building that gives combat strength is completed mid-turn. And finally, if a district is pillaged, update the stats on its banner, if it has one, and on the parent city so the garrison strength will update. So some bug fixes to great people and loyalty, as well as policies and governments coming up. Fix for great generals and admirals not being able to activate on opposing units. Allow for a great person to be activated immediately if a required building is purchased underneath him or her. When a conquered city is kept, update some figures related to its loyalty per turn to ensure that the displayed UI data is correct and consistent. When a city is locked at full loyalty due to a game effect, Statue of Liberty, Phoenicia unique ability, etc., show the loyalty per turn as 0 and stable in the UI, and show always fully loyal in the panel's math breakdown, just to make it very clear that you have that help. Policies and governments. Fix for Praetorium policy not correctly applying unless the governor was established. Democracy's government bonus shouldn't apply if the district is pillaged. The Classic Republic government amenity and housing bonus should only count if the city has an unpillaged district. Fix for issue that was allowing Dark Age policies to remain slotted beyond their appropriate era. Trade routes. Fix for many trade route bonuses that were only designed to apply to the owner or origin of a trade route, applying to recipients of a trade route as well. Trade route capacity is now correctly reduced when buildings are pillaged. Fix for Alexander's preferences not working properly. A fix for Sumeria and Foreign Ministry building not properly working together. Ensure that Mvemba doesn't receive the devout agenda, which makes a lot of sense because Mvemba can't found a religion. Fix for issue where City-State Protector agenda was cross-wired with the civilized agenda, and one leader could care about both at the same time. That's hilarious. Techs and Civics apprenticeship now functions properly when repairing an improvement. Nice. All right, some bug fixes to Espionage. This is a long list of little bug tweaks. I'm liking this, even though some of these things I had never encountered before. Although hopefully many of you have, so this is still useful to go through the nitty-gritty. Add details to text for rise and fall spy missions. Disable the skip, turn, and sleep buttons when spies are on a mission, like that. Outlaw listening post mission versus allies. That makes sense as well. Don't let bonuses to spy establishment time in city exceed 100%. Okay. Historic moments based on making tile improvements on a tile with extra yield from a natural disaster, from a first mountain, or when you build your first mountain tunnel, will no longer trigger when the improvement is gained by conquering or otherwise gaining ownership of a city where the improvement already existed. That seems to make sense, but at the same time, it's based on content we haven't played yet because it's just come out, so not sure why that needs to be on the list. Correct an error in Archipelago that was causing it not to generate tiny islands. So that's the Archipelago map mode. It wasn't generating tiny islands, which is nice to see that they've made that a little bit more detailed. Allow joint and third-party wars immediately after the announcement if a Golden Age war is available. Nice. Fix for an order of operations bug, preventing governor effects from reapplying when a governor is reassigned to a city they are already established in. Pillage districts should not appear in the purchase menu when players are allowed to buy districts with gold using the financier governor. So a couple of exploit fixes before we move on to the art section. Players can no longer swap tiles from an occupied city. This prevents the exploit of conquer, raid it for tiles, and return it in peace. So you can no longer swap your tiles away from a city that you haven't actually taken full control of yet and made peace with the person you took it from. That is a fantastic change. I'm happy to hear that. Correct production overflow calculation, so multipliers like policy cards get backed out of overflow. Aww. Overflow players are going to be so upset about that one. Okay, well, that makes sense from a balance standpoint. You don't want overflow to be too OP. So that makes, I think that's a sensible change. Additional miscellaneous gossip corrections and streamlining, and additional miscellaneous crash fixes, of course. So, like we mentioned earlier on, there have been a number of improvements to the art in the game. And of course, the graphics have been improved, but just the art has been updated in a lot of ways. And I'll go through what the patch list has for us on the details here. To the environment first, Brazil city set and palace has been updated, so there's just a new look to the buildings of Brazil. City centers have had some art adjustments to include canals for coastal cities. We've seen this a lot in streams. Granaries and monuments are also updated as well to be more individualized to each different civilization and ethnic group of different civilizations, which is a thing more so now in Civilization 6 than it was in the past. All model updates and optimizations. This is really an impressive list from the art team. And the art team has had praise just heaped on them, and I'll join in. Definitely from having played it and just from what they've said on the live streams. But the art team has been just so dedicated to making this expansion come to life, and it's evident in this list. Material polish pass to brighten materials to match the visual style. An update to the geometry of base models for performance, nice to see. A complete remodel of all female characters. I'm interested in why they specify all female characters, and I wonder if they mean leaders or if they mean the female characters that hang out with the settlers or whatever it might be. I'm thinking it's the in-game models, not the leaders that you see during diplomacy interactions, because I think we would have heard more about that if there was a complete remodel of all of them. Or maybe they were remodeled but not redesigned. So we'll find out more in the days to come as we play. Of course, skin tones for all units appropriate to their civilizations. As I mentioned, different ethnic groups, depending on where your civilization is in the world, your units will look different in their skin tone, which is nice to see. Team color is embedded in the textures. Oh, wow. That's a very different change. So it's not just going to be reflected in the minimap anymore or in the UI. It'll actually be reflected on the textures and on your units when you have a certain team color. Update tint color on all vehicles to match their historical origins. Set up tint color for all modern uniforms, infantry, and vehicle crews. Model variety within the same units has been improved, so various attachments and different things that are on the models, like in a single group of infantry or a single group of Roman legions, for instance, you would have more variety between the units, so that it's just going to look better and more visually appealing. Extensive polish pass on all great people, new models added, and new geometry for them. The scale has been adjusted, and the count has been adjusted for air units in an individual air unit. So they're a little bit differently sized, and there are maybe 4 now in each unit, depending on what unit you're talking about, I suppose. And then also for C units, there's been an adjustment to the scale and count of C units in a single group. There's been an adjustment to siege unit crewmen and defenders to match the appropriate era. Embarked ships now more closely match the number of unit members on the field. So if there is a scout that's hopping out into the ocean, there'll just be one transport ship instead of randomly 2 ships to carry 1 guy. So that makes a lot of sense. It's the same for Great People. And then there have been many additional miscellaneous graphical tweaks and updates. And this list does not cover it. When you just look at the game, when you're able to see it without any YouTube compression artifacts, just playing the game on your own computer without any Twitch compression artifacts, it is gorgeous. And I can't wait for all of you to experience it, yourselves, because it really is, again, not a comprehensive, huge change to the art style, but just a great incremental improvement that really modernizes the look of the game while being true to that art style. So just a few things at the very end here. They had to add this to the patch notes, didn't they? Scout Cat. So if you have linked your game to your 2K account, you will get an alternate skin for the Scout unit that replaces the Scout's dog with 3 cats. And then finally, for modders, a few last notes for you. Added tagging for mod compatibility. Mods not tagged as compatible with the latest build will be disabled at startup, as well as have a warning dialog displayed when they are enabled. This behavior can be disabled on a per mod basis or completely in the options dialog. Mods can be tagged as compatible by either adding, etc., to the properties section of the mod info, or by marking compatible versions in the project page of ModBuddy. So that's nice to see that you can send a little bit more signaling to the users of your mods that you have updated them for the current version. Total War has had this for a while, so it's good for Civ to catch up, because I tend to play a little bit more Civ than Total War these days. So, no offense to Total War, but, that's just the way it is. World Builder updates, including painting mode, auto coastlines, importing from tiled, and more. And very important note, this was discussed also in Sarah's pre-launch live stream yesterday. They're not done. They're still working on bringing more in the coming weeks to the modding tool. So this is an incomplete list, definitely. That's it for the patch notes. If you want to follow along with my first series in Gathering Storm, we're already on episode 3 as Dido of Phoenicia, so don't forget to check that out while you're here and subscribe to follow along. Comments are always welcome, so again, as I mentioned many times, do feel free to discuss the patch notes down below. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time.